Hello and welcome to this video on contestability. So in this video we're going to look at the concept of contestable markets. So previously we've talked about different levels of competition that we might see within an industry, from perfect competition, lots of firms, to only one firm dominating in the industry. And generally speaking, we have been concerned about the fewer firms in the industry, the less competition and the less desirable this is. Contestable markets theory says that actually really what we should be thinking about is not how many firms there are, but whether there can be a contest to be the dominant firm in that market or to succeed in that market. Have we got a range of firms who potentially could enter this market? And if so, then maybe that is acceptable in its own right. So when we talk about contestable markets, we're talking about a market where there is freedom of entry to the industry and where costs of exit are low, so low barriers to entry and exit. And contestable markets are constantly changing. We can see them at local, regional, national, international level. And the key is that in a contestable market, the number of firms and the size distribution of firms is not considered to be the most important. What is important is the credible threat of entry from rivals. So how much does the threat of entry from rivals influence the firm's behavior? And if barriers to entry are low, it's likely that this market could be contested, other entrants could enter, and so this will impact on how the companies in that market behave. Almost all markets are contestable to some degree. There are barriers to entry, but they're not impossible to overcome. Technology is having a big impact on changing contestability. So it's a lot easier to enter many industries nowadays because of digital technology. So many startups use the web as a platform to enter markets, whereas previously having physical stores or branches would make it much more difficult. So many industries, as we know, may be oligopolistic, but the freedom to entry and exit may be greater than it first appears. So we could get some oligopolistic firms, only a few large companies dominate, but there are low barriers to entry for this particular market. And we would describe these markets as being contestable. And the implication of this is that in the long run, we're not going to get supernormal profits because entrants could enter and contest the market. And so in the long run, in a contestable market, even if it's an oligopoly, we would expect normal profits to be made, as any supernormal profit would be competed away by new entrants contesting the market. So some examples of where we might consider it to be an oligopoly or monopoly, but actually the market can be contested. So in the past we might have said the hotel industry was an oligopoly. A few large hotel chains dominate the market, but actually Airbnb has shown that a new entrant could enter that market and could contest that. If we think about the food industry, we might think it's an oligopoly. A few large fast food companies, Burger King, McDonald's, etc. But Five Guys has shown that actually this is a contestable market. A new brand, a new company could enter. If we think about city transport services, we might have thought of the local bus or railway company have a monopoly on transport. But actually a company like Uber using technology could contest that market. With books, the publishers, we might think of Amazon. With banks and lending money, we might think of more peer-to-peer lending websites contesting this market. With education, we might think the government is a monopoly, the only provider. But actually with private education and private education chains, they are maybe contesting this market. So even when we have oligopoly and monopoly markets, we can still sometimes see that this can be contested as long as the barriers to entry are low and can be overcome. And as you can see in some of these examples, technology is a good way to do that. So what conditions do we need to contest the market? Well, we need some new businesses who are willing and ready to enter the market. So for example, people to develop apps like Uber. We need no significant entry or exit costs. We need access to the available industry technologies, and we need customers to be prepared to switch. We call that high rates of customer churn. Another way of saying this would be to say we need an absence of sunk costs, we need access to all available technology, low rates of customer loyalty, and low barriers to entry. So there's a strong link here between contestability and sunk costs. So sunk costs are money we pay to enter the market. We need to pay to enter the market. It's going to be difficult to recover. So for example, a large amount of spend on marketing to match the brand of another company that's already in the market. Sunk costs cannot be recovered if a firm leaves an industry. When sunk costs are high, a market becomes less contestable. So the water industry, the tap water industry, is less contestable, for example, than the peer-to-peer lending industry. I need to invest a lot of money in reservoirs and pipes to enter the water industry, high sunk costs. To enter the peer-to-peer lending industry, really I just need to develop the app. So high sunk costs act as a barrier to entry for new firms. They risk making significant losses if they decide to exit. In markets such as fast food, restaurant, sandwich bar, hairdressing, local antiques markets, there are low sunk costs, so the barriers to exit are low and contestability is high. Some other barriers that might prevent contestability, well, maybe incumbent firms can take advantage of large economies of scale. If the supply chain is vertically integrated, then they may control key supplies. If customer brand loyalty is very significant, if they have patents maybe over technology, if they've got very strong expertise in terms of the staff they employ or their reputation, again, it might be hard for a new entrant to enter the market and contest. A good example of a contestable market might be the story of the UK supermarket industry and the arrival of Aldi and Lidl. So Lidl is following a strategy of rapid organic growth, and Aldi is now the world's leading limited assortment grocery. It has sales of 61 billion euros, followed closely by Lidl with sales of 59 billion euros. Together, these two German discounting supermarkets have grown very quickly throughout Europe. A majority of their products are own label rather than brands, which gives them purchasing power with suppliers. They don't have particularly wide ranges, which makes it more efficient, and they can buy bigger volumes. So there's a good example here. Aldi and Lidl, who have contested, have managed to enter the UK supermarket industry and many European supermarket markets, showing that actually it's not an oligopoly. Barriers are potentially surmountable, and so there's a threat of new entrants from these other providers. So what is likely to be the case if a market is contestable? In the long run, we're unlikely to see supernormal profits being maintained. So in this diagram here, in the short run, we might see a high price, a greater than cost, profit maximization, and supernormal profits, P1 and C1. But it's likely in a contestable market, even if it's an oligopoly, the threat of new entrants or new entrants actually joining will drive down prices, and in the long run, the price should be the same as the average cost. So here we'd expect competition to drive prices down to P2, firms to try and compete in terms of their output, Q2, and normal profits to be made. So in this video we've looked at the concept of contestable markets and how contestability might be more important than purely whether the market is a monopoly, oligopoly, monopolistic. That's it. Thank you very much for listening.